You're listening to Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions on product and business strategy. And now, here's your host, Bob Caporelli.
Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real questions from real people in real companies, just like yours. Welcome back, strategy creators, to episode 96. Good question here coming your way. Before we get to it, don't forget to visit the sponsor of this show, also the company that I founded and owned and work for, not owned, own, and work for currently, Strategy Generation Company. Go visit us at strategygeneration.com. We offer training and tools and resources, soon to come online courses. So all kinds of great things if you are interested in learning more about the subjects of product, business, or marketing strategy. So maybe you have a team inside of your organization. You need some help developing strategies, developing strategic skills. We're definitely the company that you want to consider to help your teams with that. So again, go visit us at strategygeneration.com to learn more. So on to this week's question, which is probably something that has been answered in some shape, form, or fashion on some other episode. I didn't actually go back and check exactly where I answered this because I didn't answer it exactly in the way that I'm going to answer it today. But I know it's a theme that we've covered. And I don't mind repeating this one because it's really, really important. So here it is. Dear Strategy, how do you build a strategy that all levels of an organization can participate in and support, making sure to communicate the why and not just the what? So I just love the way that this question was formulated. And of course, I love the theme of it as well. In fact, this person pretty much answered the question inside of the question. And the key there, of course, was saying, making sure to communicate the why and not just the what. And this is where I'm sure that I've touched on this theme somewhere in the past, but probably not as directly as I plan to do it today, because this is just so incredibly important. Now, the first part of the question where we talk about, making sure that you're building a strategy that all levels of an organization can participate in and support. Well, I have to say that that's not going to be the case in every single strategy or for every single strategy. Obviously, if it's an overall company strategy, then yes, that should be the case. And in that case, the strategy needs to be communicated really, really well throughout all levels of the organization. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But I will say that there are also going to be strategies that are not going to be socialized throughout the organization because there's some level of confidentiality that has to go along with it. For example, a specific acquisition just might not warrant or might not, you might not be able to communicate that to all levels of an organization, especially when the acquisition discussions are happening. So, you have to think about the type of strategy that we're talking about. Some strategies require an element of surprise or an element of confidentiality in order to be successful. And so that, that's going to be the case in some cases. And I only say this because sometimes, employees get angry with that or frustrated with that. Say, well, we didn't know about this or we didn't know about that. Well, there are regulations that would prevent some things from being socialized throughout a company at certain times. So don't get too frustrated by that. But assuming that we're talking about a strategy that should be socialized to everyone in an organization, yes, there are plenty of organizations that don't do this very well. And so, what I've said in the past, and I'll say it again, is that leaders have got to make sure that they're communicating their strategy. And when I'm saying leaders, I'm not just saying the top leader. A lot of times I see that top leaders do communicate their strategies to their staffs, and then it kind of stops there. In other words, maybe the staff doesn't see that strategy is part of their responsibility or part of their ownership. So they feel like, well, they've been let in on the CEO's strategy, and it's the CEO's job to communicate it to the rest of the organization. That's just not true in most cases. In most cases, the CEO is relying on his or her staff to do that work for them, right? So they communicate the strategy to their leaders, and then those leaders have to communicate it to their leaders, and so on down the chain. And usually when strategies aren't communicated very well, it's that kind of middle level of leadership that's dropping the ball, quite honestly, because they don't feel that it's their strategy. So if you're at the top of an organization, make sure it's clear to your leaders that they own this strategy as much as you do, and they need to communicate it to their teams. And then those leaders need to do it again. And then those leaders need to do it to their teams, and so on down the line. That's got to be really, really clear. And if that happens, then you'll have an army of people that are all communicating this strategy to one another, everyone taking responsibility, everyone taking ownership, and everything will work. And again, it usually is just as simple as putting that little disclaimer in there. A lot of times I see that leaders who get told the strategies from their CEOs don't communicate it because they don't know what part of that strategy they should be communicating or not. They assume that everything the CEO tells them is confidential. And so without any direction to the contrary, they're going to treat it that way. So the leaders have to put that disclaimer in there. Hey, make sure that you communicate this. And what I do as a leader, and what I like to suggest that leaders do as well, is create a deck that you give to your leadership teams and say, this is the deck that's for public consumption. I expect that each one of you are going to communicate this deck to your teams and give this deck to your teams to communicate to their teams and so on down the line. Like, make it so clear that there can be no misinterpretation of what you're asking them to do. And in that way, now you'll have everyone helping you to communicate that strategy. There's no need that the CEO has to go and talk to, hundreds of thousands of people if you're in a very, very large company. I mean, it's almost impossible to do that. I mean, you can, but look, there's an easier way. You have good people in your organization for a reason that can help you with these tasks. Just make it clear that they're supposed to. So that's how I would suggest doing that. Now, this next part that was written, right? Making sure to communicate the why and not just the what. That's another incredibly important element that leaders need to be aware of. A lot of times when these strategies cascade down, they're just a series of things that people are being asked to do. But the context of why they're being asked to do it sometimes gets lost or missing. And although knowing what you're expected to do is better than not knowing what you're expected to do, it's not anywhere near as good as knowing what you're expected to do and why you're expected to do it, right? Knowing the bigger context. That's why I like this idea of a deck, because if leaders put together a deck that their leaders are supposed to communicate, that deck can have all of it in there, right? That presentation can be all encompassing of both the why and the what. And that's how that message will get communicated clearly. But it does have to be in there. If you think that you're just going to give people 3, strategic initiatives, say, this is what we care about, go do it. I mean, okay, they can be good soldiers and follow your orders, but it's not going to be anywhere near as effective as if you tell them why, give them context, and then maybe you're going to get some good ideas, you're going to get some good interpretations, or at the very least, when they go to execute on the things that you want them to execute on, they're going to do it in a much more positive way, a much more motivated way, and a way that's within the context of why you wanted those things to be done to begin with. So all of it just falls really, really well into place when you do communicate the why and not just the what. So that's where I would go with this. Again, number one, make sure that leaders use their leaders, make it clear that they're supposed to cascade the strategy down, and if possible, give them a presentation to do that with. And part two, when you give them that presentation in that direction, make sure you include not only the what needs to be done, but also the why it needs to be done. And you're going to get really, really good results when you follow those two very, very simple pieces of advice. Okay? And by the way, if you are lower in an organization and that's not happening, feel free to share this episode with your leaders and see if it has any impact, because hopefully no one's going to give you any pushback on this kind of an approach, because it just makes too much sense if I do say so myself. So share it with them. Definitely share it with them. And share it with your friends and leave us a review and, hit the like button wherever you can hit that like button, if there is a like button to be found, because the more people that find this show and the more people that know about this show, the more other people will find it and learn and utilize it. And the better world this will be, I'm sure. So while you're doing all of that, don't forget to go out to dearstrategy.net or dearstrategy.com. They both work. And go read the blog posts that go along with every one of these podcasts. More free learning for you and more things that you can pass along to your friends and leaders. And while you're doing that, don't forget to make time for the plan. And we'll see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caparelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.